What if I told you that you could make sourdough bread without using water? Okay, hold on. What on earth does that mean? First, let's start with what every loaf of sourdough starts with, and that is the starter. So I'm going to discard a little bit of the starter. I had a bit too much. This is not necessary though. You can actually go ahead and use whatever you have. But you actually only need a tiny bit of starter. Anyway, I'm feeding it. And what am I feeding it? I'm doing a 1-to-1 ratio, which means I'm doing 50 grams of flour and 50 grams of water. But you could also use whey, which is what I was referring to in the beginning of the video. So I make my sourdough predominantly using whey. So I get the whey from various dairy projects that I have going on at different times. I'm doing different things with dairy. Sometimes I'm making yogurt, sometimes I'm making cream cheese using amasi. I usually just have a lot of whey sitting around, and it's a really good way to use it up. I'm using a hair tie to mark where my sourdough starter is now, so that I can see in future or in a few hours where it should be, which is it should have doubled. And so this is what I always look for. And you also want to see quite a few bubbles forming in the starter, and this means that you're ready. So what I'm doing here is I'm using 100 grams of my fed and ready starter. You do want it to be bubbly because this is what is going to be causing your dough to rise. And then I'm going ahead and adding 475 grams of flour. This is in fact brown bread flour. You can use white bread flour, that's completely fine. You can also use a whole wheat flour. I just use, this is the brand that I use. I get it at my local Spar, my grocery store. It's from a brand called Eureka. And now I'm adding in 325 grams of whey. You can use water. So basically I'm just substituting the water portion of the recipe with whey, and then I'm adding 10 grams of salt. And if you know me, you know this is definitely Oryx Desert Salt. It is the best. Now we are going to begin mixing together the whey, the flour, the salt, and the starter. So I usually use a spatula for this. If you have a mixer, go ahead. You can also use your hands. It does get quite messy, so yeah, give your hands a good wash, and you can definitely get in there with your hands. So the purpose of this first step is just to make sure that everything is very well combined. And I think this step is called Autolyse, but I could be mistaken, guys. I'm not in any way a sourdough expert. I've just been making sourdough for a few months now. And I've been loving the process. Definitely have made a lot of mistakes, and I'm still getting there. Sourdough is not the easiest thing in the world, but it is super rewarding, and it's not rocket science. So there are just a few basics. You want a good healthy starter, and you want to be following a few basic steps. So this first part, you just want to be combining everything. And once you kind of have got everything nicely combined, you are actually just going to cover it and let it rest for a while. And then the gluten is going to start forming on its own naturally. So just give it a cover and leave it for about half an hour. Once that half an hour is up, this is me a few hours later. I had, I think, already done a few of these stretch and folds is what this is called. So you bringing up your dough from the bowl and then bringing it back down and just kind of getting that gluten activated. And the more you do this, the less sticky and more formed together it becomes, and the nicer it is to work with. So you want to be doing at least 2 to 3, 4 maybe sets of the stretch and fold. And then once those are done, you can leave it overnight. I do usually leave mine in the fridge overnight, and that is when the sourdough is going to be bulk fermenting. Look, guys, again, I could be completely wrong, but this is how I do it. I'm not an expert, but if you have any pointers for me, if you know a little bit more about sourdough than I do, please let me know. This is where I'm folding my dough. So I'm stretching it out into like a rectangle and then doing a few like envelope folds, and now I'm rolling it up and then bringing the edges together and then trying to get it nice and like as compacted as possible, as I don't know how to describe it, but you can see what I'm doing here. I'm kind of stitching the ends together to kind of make it into one cohesive ball again. And this is where I'm basically shaping the dough now into what I want it to kind of be when I bake it. And then it rests again for a bit more rising time, and then I'm putting it out onto this silicone baking tray, and now it is getting closer to the time that I'm going to be baking this loaf. I think I should have let it rise a little bit longer, but anyway, it's time to bake. I've preheated my oven to 200 degrees. You do actually want it to be as hot as possible, and then I've baked it for about 45 minutes in total, checking it a few times. As you can see here, I have got actually a bowl of hot water to help with the steam, and I have actually placed my loaf on a baking stone, which is helping it to get a nice even temperature distribution and a lovely crust. And this is the result. It came out great. I think it could have cooked a little bit longer, and then a secret here, and where I often go wrong, is that I don't let it rest for long enough and cool properly before cutting into it, because I'm just too impatient. So don't be like me, guys. Definitely let your bread rest well and completely cool down before you actually get in there and start cutting. But overall, definitely edible. This is not a bad loaf. Sourdough has so many health benefits that I would strongly recommend that you give it a go. Don't be discouraged. It's a learning process, and I think, you know, it's a lifelong kind of thing. It's something that you can people always love fresh bread, and it's an investment in your health. If you're going to be eating bread, you may as well make it super healthy and like the best that you can. So I would highly encourage that you find a starter or you create your own. It is quite simple, and there are many videos on YouTube. If you'd like me to create a video on my starter, I did actually buy a starter from someone else, but you can actually create your own starter in about a week just using water and flour. But this is it, and there's actually really nothing nicer than warm, fresh sourdough bread with lots of butter. It's one of the absolute joys of life. And even if your loaf is not perfect, just keep going, you'll get there. But in the meantime, each loaf that you make will definitely be edible and delicious, and people will absolutely love you for making sourdough. So go ahead and give it a try, and thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you'd like to see me make next. I'll be making a video to show you how I freeze my sourdough. Until then, happy sourdough baking.